Welcome to the Weekly Defence Podcast, the show that's about defence procurement and military technology. We are brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Nammo. I'm the host this week, Richard Thomas, and on the show, we speak to Lockheed Martin about its modernised turret for the AH-64E Apache helicopter, and land editor Beth Maundrill reports from the floor at AUSA last week, speaking to representatives from Cubic Global Defence, QinetiQ, and Northrop Grumman. But first, our weekly news roundup, and I'm joined by Tim Martin.
Hi, Rich.
And Matt Smith. Matt, hi.
Hi.
So, kick off. Matt, you are in charge of all things analytical and analysis. What have you got for us?
That's right. So it's been quite an interesting couple of weeks for us. We are putting the final touches together on our aircraft forecast, which is sort of the last in that series of reports that we're doing looking at the future marketplace. So we've been doing some deep dives into some of those very large programs like F-35, the Eurofighter, and a whole load of other sort of emerging requirements that we're looking at.
I'll put it to you both. I mean, there's an awful lot of interest in fifth-gen fighters and all sorts of things like that. Obviously, F-35 has been in the news quite readily. What kind of opportunities are there for F-35 in light of Turkey being sort of booted out of that program? Anyone?
So with the F-35, it's super interesting. With Turkey losing its, partnership status, and I guess it's important to note as well here that the US hasn't necessarily completely rule Turkey out for all time. If they get rid of the S-400s, they'll be able to come back into the program. That may not be on the cards, but it's worth mentioning.
I jump in there, Matt, and say it's quite interesting because on a presentation from Lockheed Martin on the F-35, they still have the Turkish flag as a listed country. And they were asked during a press conference previously why that's the case. And they simply said that it isn't official yet that they've been removed from the program despite US decision makers saying so. So, I think that's a bit of not necessarily a grey area, I guess, because there doesn't seem to be a case for them to rejoin the program. But as you say, certainly that, if other changes, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of that sort of side of things, it definitely put the cat amongst the pigeons in terms of certainly our forecasting and what we're thinking about how the market's going to evolve. I was chatting to our aircraft analyst, Ilker, and one of the things that he was pointing out was that there's been an awful lot of activity between Russia and Turkey recently. President Erdogan was over in Russia for MAX, and they were reportedly talking about Su-35 and Su-57. And of course, either of those airplanes would be a conceivable alternative for the F-35, if they decided to go down that route.
Yeah, I mean, it's not escaped many people's attention that the notion of the US pushing Turkey away, it might end up pushing Turkey away into the arms of Russia. So it's obviously one to watch out for.
Absolutely.
It's all well and good talking about these large fifth-gen strike aircraft, but you've got to learn how to fly a jet first. So what about in the training arena? How's that industry moving along?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of activity. I mean, I suppose in a way it's not surprising when you consider the volume of new sort of big fifth, maybe even sixth generation combat aircraft that's going on at the minute. There is a sort of commensurate increase in the training market. But also there's that kind of intermediate level as well. So those advanced trainers, the ones you can put, say, a small number of light weapons on, the sort of light strike, light fighter type capability. And we're seeing a lot of potential for those kinds of programs in the future. We reported, I think earlier in October, that Aerovortichody has been looking at lots of different opportunities for its L-39NG. And so we did a little bit of a deep dive into actually what's out there in terms of those requirements. And one of the interesting things is those smaller countries who don't necessarily have a particularly high-end requirement for fast jets or fifth, sixth generation type aircraft, but need something lighter, cheaper, but that delivers an effect that they can actually use on a day-to-day basis. And that's where we see a lot of the demand.
Certainly. I mean, that goes across every single domain, doesn't it? You're looking at militaries, even, the top-tier militaries looking for lower-end, less capable platforms to fulfill a very specific mission set, whether that's, Type 31, I got to mention, there we go, for sort of maritime patrolling or sort of lighter armoured vehicles instead of your full main battle tanks. Obviously, you need to kind of cut your cloth to suit, don't you? And meet the budgets, which is always a stress.
Yeah, and I think it's also having, certainly, if you look at some of the more sophisticated militaries, having that kind of high-low mix of capabilities, so you can't everything can't just be invested in one type of capability. You need to have things that will be flexible enough to meet different kinds of situation.
I mean, most military forces do have a two-tier structure these days, as much as most ministries of defences would like to have gold-plated everything. That's just not possible these days, is it? Tim, unmanned news from AUSA a week or so ago.
Yes, I wanted to mention the US Army's RQ-7 Shadow replacement program because it's, I suppose, the current process is that 4 contractors are working through prototype and demonstration phase, and that's in line with a policy from the US Army to buy, try, decide. So previously, last year, there was demonstrations held involving the 4 contractors. So that's Arcturus UAV, Textron's are assigned HQ, L3 Harris VFR 90, and Martin UAV's VBAT.
Tim, you just mentioned there buy, try and decide. It seems to be a quite obvious way to conduct a procurement program, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite strange. So it's first, so what they're doing is they're letting the platoons have the aircraft, the 4 aircraft, and they've already done the testing. So that's the trying bit. And they're already on contract for this part. So that's the buying and the trying. And the decision is then when they'll put, after doing all that, is when they'll make a decision and say, you're the one contractor that we want. Here's the money to have it. Anyway, to get to the nub of the story, beyond all of the technical processes, there does seem to be, there did appear at least previously to be some difficulty over the technical specifications of the aircraft insofar as because L3 had acquired Latitude Engineering, L3 now have the licensing authority agreements for the hybrid flight test kits, not only of the FVR-90, but also for Textron's assigned HQ and Arcturus UAV. So what would that mean? Well, potentially it could mean that if L3 Harris were to further down the line lose out on a contract, they could potentially revoke the licensing authority for the hybrid flight kit. You know, a crucial piece of kit here and a crucial bit of technology that, you know, if one of their competitors was to win the thing, yeah, they could potentially, you know, for commercial reasons say, okay, well, we're no longer gonna support that. Now, I suppose you could also say that that might be a bit of a leap, to be quite honest. And the US Army have certainly said that they're unconcerned by developments at this stage. Although they did say to me that no matter what decision was taken in terms of who would win the contract, they did say that they would expect that industry would come to an arrangement whereby there would be a crossover in terms of the technical know-how or the license authority, that it wouldn't result in any fallout. So we'll I suppose wait and see on that one.
Like you say, Tim, it sounds like there's a little bit more water has to run under a few bridges first before we get a few more answers and some more clarity on that program. But very interesting.
Yeah, and just I suppose as a kind of final point, the Future Tactical UAS program is, in replacing Shadow, what's being required here is a runway independent system, something with low acoustic signature and transportable in the Chinook, because Shadow isn't runway independent, for example, and there's also talk of a smaller logistical footprint. It's worth mentioning those are the real requirements here, and capabilities being sought at least.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate your time. For more information on all of these stories, of course, links will be included in the show notes, or see the Shephard Media website. Coming up on the podcast, we hear from Tom Eldredge, Director of Apache Fire Control Programs at Lockheed Martin Missiles and Fire Control, about the enhancements to the AH-64E. But first, Beth Maundrill takes a tour of the AUSA show floor to find out what's new.
While the podcast is a newer venture for Shephard Media, we've actually been in the defence publishing business for almost 40 years and have built up a strong and loyal audience base. Our content is trusted and consumed by key decision makers through Shephard Media's multiple channels. One benefit of having such a dedicated audience base is our ability to offer a comprehensive range of message delivery options to our advertisers. From brand awareness campaigns across a combination of print and digital media, through targeted email campaigns or show dailies, to a multitude of online opportunities, or even advertising opportunities within the podcast itself. If you'd like to know more, please visit shepherdmedia.com/advertising. I'm joined by Steve Wadey and Jeff Yours from QinetiQ and Mary Williams from MTech to talk about the latest developments between their two companies. So, Steve, as the Chief Executive of QinetiQ, can we talk a little bit about the acquisition that's going on with MTech and why that's a good fit for QinetiQ at the moment?
Hi, Beth. Yeah, we're really excited. At the beginning of October, we announced agreement to acquire MTech. This is the first major acquisition that we've pursued in the United States for several years, and it's important to the group at a number of levels. So first of all, this is the largest defense and security market in the world, and this acquisition of MTech brings together really complementary sensing technologies with our strengths in robotics and autonomy that we have within our team in QinetiQ North America. And the combination of those technologies really brings new capabilities to the US warfighter.
And Mary, as the CEO of MTech, what are some of the products that your company offers?
Thank you, Beth. As MTech, we provide full life cycle support of development of C5ISR and force protection technology. So we support research and development of advanced component technology. We do rapid prototyping and development, as well as fielding and sustainment of some of the ISR and force protection sensor systems we build.
And why are some of these products in particular of interest to the end user? What kind of gaps in the market do you see MTech's products really fitting into?
That's a good question, Beth. We provide basically what you just said, the gaps in the market. So right now there's a need for ISR and smart sensor technologies to support the warfighter mission. And to do that, we need to identify where technology is not solving the mission problems. And so what we do is what we call mission-led innovation, where we identify the gaps, we pull in the advanced technology, integrate with current capabilities to provide the needs of the warfighter.
And from MTech's point of view then, why is working with QinetiQ a good fit?
Right, so we do a lot of innovation and rapid development, and as we've been doing this over the last 3 years, we've been growing significantly. We see a greater demand in the services we provide, and we really need to scale to provide a greater capability for our customer. We were looking for a like-minded company to partner with to really bring the capabilities to our customer, and that was QinetiQ. We have the same philosophies as a company to do mission-led innovation, but also to advance the development of co-created technology with our customer.
Of course, whilst we're having this discussion, we are sat at AUSA 2019 in Washington, D.C., which is focused towards the US Army as the end user. So, Jeff, we've got quite a lot of robots on the QinetiQ North America stand. Can you talk to us a little bit about the products that QinetiQ's showing this week?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. So at QinetiQ North America, we provide a number of robotic products aimed primarily at keeping the warfighters safe. So it's all about soldier safety from that respect. So we have products that range from small backpackable robots like the CRISI program of record that we provide, and these robots generally tend to be about either IED defeat or ISR types of applications. We have the Talon robot, and we're also taking part in the CRIS-H, the heavy robotic application too. So all of these robots provide services that do the job that a man normally would, but keeping them at a safe distance. And we're also, you'll see around the booth too, that we have large unmanned ground vehicles too, which again, doing the same type of thing, but in a larger sense for providing both protection and mission capability for the soldier, but keeping him at a safe distance.
So to just finish off then with our conversation, obviously we've talked about acquisitions, robot technologies, working closely with the warfighter, and obviously QinetiQ seems to be looking to expand. What would you say, Steve, is the next step for QinetiQ, the next step for QinetiQ North America, maybe over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, the next steps are really quite clear. First of all, we need to complete the acquisition of MTech over the coming months. And then really it's looking about how we combine our capabilities. Mary's talked about the strengths that we have in the MTech business. Jeff has talked about the strengths and market offerings that we have in QinetiQ North America. The combined capability is going to be 750 brilliant people here in this marketplace with a shared purpose and a shared vision of what they can bring to the US warfighter. And very much we'll be looking at how we can integrate and leverage our complementary skills, and then focus on new programs where we can offer new value to the customer here.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing more from the MTech QinetiQ group in the future. I'm joined by Robert Kailbar, VP of Business Development for Cubic Global Defence, who's going to talk to Shephard a little bit about the Army Synthetic Training Environment effort and what Cubic's involvement in that is. So maybe if we could start off with some of the most recent news. I understand you recently were awarded a contract for one area of this synthetic training environment effort, looking at realistic ballistic simulation. So can you describe that to us a little bit?
So, Cubic is recently selected at the end of this fiscal year, 2020, as one of the awardees for Synthetic Training Environment Live Force on Force. Specifically, we were selected for the Focus Area 1, which is focusing on the simulation of weapon lethality for small arms, anything that's firing caliber around 5.56 or 7.62. So it's one of the Army's toughest challenges in the 4 focus areas that they have to solve. And we're really happy and excited about coming up with a solution that we've initially demonstrated to the Army.
And you mentioned there's the 4 focus areas. Can you just describe those and how you are positioned for those other areas as well as the one you've just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. So the 4 focus areas, Focus Area 1, which I already mentioned. Focus Area 2 is actually called Short Range Indirect Fire. So that focuses on a solution for a weapons platform similar to an M320 or M203. Focus Area 3 focused specifically on a surrogate weapon solution for long-range indirect fire, so 60 millimeter mortar, M224. And then Focus Area 4, which was much broader, actually let other companies who might have partial solutions participate in the OTA for special technologies that would enable any one of the other 3 focus areas.
And this is all about bringing the live and the synthetic together. So why do you think the Army's really pursuing this, and why is it important to have those 2 training environments working so closely together?
Yeah, so the Army has a pretty well thought out vision. And if you read their statement of need, you can see that they've been laying out their problems, their training gaps, their shortcomings. And I'll just give you one, just reciting from the statement of need. about 40% of the squad or the platoon's weapon systems aren't able to be replicated today in the force-on-force collective fight. So that's a key focus area, and that would be represented by Focus Area 2, the short-range indirect fire, and Focus Area 3, the long-range indirect fire. So today, when they collectively train in a live training environment, they have no ability to bring those weapon systems into that fight. So it doesn't replicate what they would realistically do in a real combat solution.
So they're essentially looking to replicate more accurately that real combat situation that they would find themselves in. So how, especially like with reference to the Focus Area 1, which you're like now part of, which you said is a challenge for the Army, how is QBIC placed to be able to meet the needs of this new requirement?
Well, I think QBIC is really well placed, and I think the Army understood that too, to solve the toughest technical challenges in Focus Area 1. I would give it analogous to, QBIC's been doing this for 20 plus years, and we have fielded systems in the quantities of several 100,000, and literally millions and millions of trigger pulls have occurred on our systems in collective training across the globe. So not just with the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps, but with all of our allied partners. So we understand all the dynamics that happen from weapons lethality to logistics train to technology shortcomings to the environment in which we operate in, and how to bring technology and weapons platforms together to replicate weapons lethality in an accurate training environment.
And so just on the timeline then, finally, what will you be working on towards timelines, and what will be next in terms of your delivery of this to the U.S. Army?
Sure. As far as timelines go, right now we have our kickoff meeting coming up with the Army at the end of October. And in the true epitome of rapid prototyping and proof of concept, we're going to be moving to a final prototype assessment around the August timeframe. So we'll be moving to the next phase in a very, very short order with technology that was in your local electronics store just days and weeks ago.
Well, thank you so much for that overview, and we look forward to continuing to follow the Army's efforts in the synthetic training environment world. I'm joined by Mark Skinner and Michael O'Hara from Northrop Grumman to talk about short-range air defence and some of the new technologies that they're adding to that requirement. So if we can start off then by taking a quick look about how Northrop Grumman has been involved in SHORAD, especially with the US Army. Michael, can you give us a bit of an overview of that to start with?
Sure. Northrop Grumman has been developing the C2, formerly known as FAD C2, with the U.S. Army for the past 30 plus years. We've been building upon that technology on the C2 from reducing the size and weight of the systems from servers down to tablets in today's environment. We've been working very diligently with the Army on integrating sensors and effectors. So as FAD has grown from 30 years ago, we added counter UAS and counter rockets, artillery, and mortar capabilities to the software. Now, as the Army is moving from the Avenger systems to the IM SHORAD systems, the C2 is now moving on board to the vehicle, in which we're tying in the vehicle sensors and effectors. On there, we have Stinger missiles, Northrop Grumman's joint venture longbow missiles, and the Northrop Grumman Bushmaster 30-millimeter gun, along with FAD C2. And that's where we are today with the U.S. Army, and which is down in the booth downstairs, system number 1 for the IM SHORAD. Now, as we move forward, we're working very closely with Northrop Grumman and our industry teammates on integrating a 50 kilowatt class laser into the Stryker with the sensors and tying it all together with the C2 system. We're really excited about that because it brings in the next generation of effectors for the U.S. Army's use. Mark Skinner here has a deep background in directed energy, been running the directed energy programs for Northrop Grumman, and I'd like to hand it off to Mark for some further information on the directed energy part.
Yeah, so Mark, obviously we're talking about a laser weapon system. So can you tell us a little bit about why these new laser technologies are important and how they meet the needs of the US Army's short-range air defense capability?
Sure, thanks. Well, this builds on Northrop Grumman's 40-year history of building laser weapon systems for the Department of Defense. We're building a 50-kilowatt class laser system for inclusion on the Stryker. Laser weapon systems gives the Army warfighter some significant advantages. Engagements at the speed of light, so we can put photons on target very, very rapidly for the warfighter. He can dial up and dial down the power effects that he wants on the target, so he can determine how much laser energy he wants to put on each individual target or threat. And it's also key from a logistics standpoint. You don't have to resupply a laser weapon system once you put it on the vehicle, and if you can generate electricity on the vehicle, then you'll have a laser weapon system with a deep magazine that can engage multiple threats in a very short period of time. And so from what Mike is doing with his FAD-C2 system, he can tie laser weapons and kinetic weapons for the Army warfighter working in conjunction to take on a whole host of threats across the battlefield. And so it affords the Army warfighter the maximum amount of flexibility to handle the threats that they'll see in the upcoming decade. It's going to be a very intense battlefield experience, I'm sure.
So you guys are working on the MSHORAD part of the Army's SHORAD requirement. Can you give us a bit of an idea of timelines and dates for that?
Sure. As far as for the directed energy portion of the MSHORAD, we are on course to complete and deliver the laser weapon module sometime next summer to the U.S. Army, which will then be working with core technologies and other industry partners to integrate it into the Stryker vehicle, along with our sensors and working with the C2. So it will be an integration path over the next year and a half, I would say, before we start going to a lays-off, which will be sometime probably second quarter-ish of 2021.
And what is a lays-off?
A lays-off is where the Army is set up an environment for testing where multiple people will be able to bring in their laser weapon systems to actually go after different types of threats and show that the technology is ready and mature to go to the next phase to produce multiple systems.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much both for providing that insight into laser weapon systems and how they will be part of the US Army's next effort with short-range air defense.
Great, thank
you. We wanted to take a short break into the podcast to tell you about Shephard Studio. Studio is our branded content offering, which gives industry a more creative way to tell their stories. Shephard Studio works closely with companies and event organisers in the aerospace and defence industry to provide bespoke, co-branded solutions, whether it is supporting a particular campaign, content surrounding a major trade show, or bringing Studio on board to more effectively tell a company's story. Studio has already been adopted by many of the major defence primes, including Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Viasat. If you're interested in learning more about Studio projects and how they could benefit your company, please visit us at www.shephard.studio.
I'm Shephard Media's Deputy Art Editor, Tim Martin, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Tom Eldridge, Director of the Apache Fire Control Programs at Lockheed Martin, and we're going to discuss the MTAD's turret replacement for the AH-64. Tom, what can you tell us about that?
So, Tim, thanks for asking. We recently received a contract from the U.S. Army for production of modernized turret. That's significant because that contract included the scope to build the test equipment and the tooling and to develop the production procedures to move that system into production. It's also significant because it brings both performance and operational capabilities to Apache aviators. It It'll bring those capabilities to help pilots find targets easier and at longer ranges, and it will also provide operational capabilities in terms of improved reliability and also improved maintainability, and both of those contribute to reduced operation and support costs.
And so if we look at the program itself, will this all be for the Guardian then, the E variant? Is that what we're saying here? Yeah.
Yes, this capability is targeted for the Guardian. It'll take about 2.5 years to complete the production non-recurring and to produce the first units. And so the first units should come off the line in around mid-2022.
I also understand that there's a new radar electronic processor box with this. What will that be used for, and how useful will it be for pilots and the program as a whole?
So the radar electronics unit is an upgrade to the fire control radar system, and it replaces the programmable signal processor and the low power RF box that are both obsolete on the current fire control radar system. So the new radar electronics unit has all the processing capability to support the new version 6 capabilities that will be fielded on the Echo model aircraft beginning in August of 2020.
And generally speaking, the Apache has always been used, I suppose, for identifying targets on land, but the capability from a naval point of view is improving. Is that correct? And how is that being made possible?
That's correct. So the joint venture that produces the Longbow Fire Control Radar and the Radar Electronics Unit was contracted to develop a maritime capability for all of the modes, and that capability will be enabled through the Radar Electronics Unit, and it will be fielded with the Echo model version 6, which will begin fielding in August of 2020.
And so being able to prosecute naval targets really is a bit of a game changer, wouldn't you say?
Sure it is. And further, it gives the ability for aviators to identify maritime targets as maritime targets. Instead of as a tank or a tracked vehicle, it'll now show up as a small, medium, or large boat.
When can we expect the U.S. Army to field the redesigned turret? Is there a timeline for that yet?
Well, we're focused on developing the specific timeline for fielding with the U.S. Army and with our aircraft partner, Boeing. I would say given that the first production units won't come off the line until mid-22, I would expect it would be early 23 for fielding of the capability.
Okay, and one other aspect I suppose is important to flag as well, and you mentioned briefly, is maintainability of the turret. I mean, where currently is there kind of difficulty with that perhaps, or how will the improvements expedite kind of issues on that front?
Great. I'm glad you asked that question, because that was really one of the primary focuses of the modernized turret activity, was to improve the operation and support costs and to reduce the burden on the soldier. So we started by looking at all the failure modes in the existing legacy turret, and we designed those failure modes out in the new modernized turret, significantly improving the reliability of the modernized turret going forward. The other thing we did was we partitioned the modernized turret so that it could be easily fault isolated to a failed component at the flight line, and then the failed component can be removed and replaced at the flight line. That significantly improves the overall time to perform maintenance on the turret, and will ultimately translate to a significant reduction in operation and support costs.
And if we look at the interaction, I suppose, between pilots and co-gunner, will there still be that same relationship in terms of looking at targets and using the weapons management system effectively?
Yes, I don't expect that to change at all because of this new system. The one thing it does is it does provide backup pilotage capability improvements for the co-pilot gunner, in that the targeting system now, with the improved motors and actuators in the modernized turret, we now have improved rates and acceleration of the sensors, so that the sensors better track to the head movement of the co-pilot gunner. So from a backup pilotage standpoint, that's a significant performance improvement that's provided by modernized turret.
And maybe just a note on kind of emerging environments and if not difficulties, then kind of what in the air domain is maybe concerning for helicopter aviators in terms of survivability. You know, how will the turret kind of support greater standoff range? You mentioned range. Does it, in effect, improve the standoff range, or...?
It does in subtle ways. The one thing that we did was we stiffened up the structure to mitigate the effects of aircraft vibration. So with the faster rates and acceleration, improved software, so that we have a better overall servo control system in high vibration environments, we can see further with more stability, and it gives us improved target tracking at longer ranges.
And given that that you've been in working on this, or generally the turret, and the overhaul for 20, 25 years, can you add that type of experience to what manufacturers might be looking for with future vertical lift helicopters, or how might you play into that program?
Well, I'd like to start by talking about what Lockheed Martin is doing for future vertical lift. To defeat peer and near-peer enemies, we're developing advanced rotary wing aircraft. We're applying our proven technologies to FARA and FLARA and to advanced UAS and air-launched effects and the modular open architecture systems so that Lockheed Martin can deliver to the DoD agile, reliable, affordable solutions to defeat tomorrow's enemies today. And so by applying those technologies, we're developing systems that will support the enduring fleet of aircraft, including Apache, so that we can maintain the relevance for the next 30 years for Apache.
Tom, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, the pleasure's mine. Thank you.
This episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Nammo. As always, a big thanks to everyone who gave their time to be part of this week's episode. And for our listeners, make sure you like and subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and tell a friend or colleague about the podcast. Until next week, thanks for listening.
Any thoughts, Tim?
Not massively, no.
Cut out the any thoughts. Yeah.